Good morning and welcome to Walk Before You Run. Today, we want to talk about the danger of the big head. Now, that was the title of a message that Thunder preached um, in July of 1997. And he talked to us from Daniel 5. But I want to go back a little bit to Daniel 4 and give you some background. Now, the passage of scripture that uh, Thunder used back in 1997 was, good morning, friend, was the danger of the big head. And he was talking about Belshazzar. Now, he reigned as king, but before him, there was his father who was Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4, I just want to read one verse to give you a feel for his mindset about God and about his place under God. Verse 37 in chapter 4 of Daniel says, Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase. Now that word abase means he is able to humble. That's kind of foretelling about his son. Now, between the reign of Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, it was about 10 years. And I'm just going to read a little bit to give you a feel for what was happening, what was taking place between when Nebuchadnezzar was reigning and when Belshazzar starts reigning. So between the years of those two, there was a lot of murder and mayhem. Nebuchadnezzar was succeeded by his son Evil Merodach, and you can find that in Second King. And he reigned for only 2 years, and then he was killed or murdered by his brother-in-law. Then Neriglissar reigned, and he reigned, but after a brief reign, he died, and he left the kingdom in the hands of his son. And later, he only the this son only lasted 2 months before he was killed or assassinated. So now you see that murder and mayhem was taking place after the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, he had put Daniel um, in a place of honor, so to speak. But let's just take a look at what takes place under King Belshazzar. Verse 2 said, well, let's read 1. 1 says, Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of lords and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father, Nebuchadnezzar, had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives, and his concubines might drink therein. They're getting ready to use these holy vessels to drink some wine and party. Verse 3 says, Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. And the king and his princes and his wives and his concubines drank in them. Wow. While they were drinking, verse 4 says that they praised the gods of gold and of silver and brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. So they are celebrating these false gods with these vessels that were dedicated to the one and only God. Can you imagine how blasphemous this was? I want to jump down to verse 5. It says, "In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote." Hmm, this should have been very shaky. Verse 6 says, "Then the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loose, and his knees smote one against another." He was shaking in his boots when he saw what God was doing. So he was celebrating all these false idol gods, and then the hand of the Most High God wrote on the wall. Then he called in the verses following, he calls all of his soothsayers and his magicians, and he asked all of them to come and tell him what this meant, and nobody could do it. Then in verse 10, it says, "Now the queen," this must have been his mom or his grandmother, because all of his wives were in his feast with him. And so here comes someone who knows a little something about a time past. It says that now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house. And the queen spake and said, "O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. Hmm. There is a man in thy kingdom in whom there is a man in thy kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods," which is just one God, the spirit of the Most High God. "And in the days of thy father, in times past, his father and his forefathers, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, the king, I say thy father, made master or chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers." So she's telling him that your father put him over everybody because no one was wiser. And remember, James, I think it is, that says, if you want wisdom, you go to God and ask him for wisdom. Verse 12 says, "For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpretation of dreams and showing of hard sentences," and that just means solving riddles, "and dissolving of doubt, were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show or declare the interpretations." So she knew about Daniel. She knew what he had done in times past. And so she tells him, if you want to know what this writing on the wall means, let me tell you who you need to call. You need to call a man of God, and his name is Daniel. And so if you will go on with me and drop all the way down to verse 17. Verse 17 says, "Then Daniel answered and said before the king, Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writings unto the king, and make known to him the interpretations." So Daniel tells him, I know you have promised all this stuff that you would give to someone, but I don't need that, because my reward comes from my Father who is in heaven. And so Daniel is going to interpret for him this dream. Sometimes when we get the big head and we start doing stuff that's outside of God, and then the answer comes to us about what we're doing, we may not want to hear it. I think the same is going to be true for the king, because he was being very disrespectful to God, just doing his own thing, and abusing his power, because he was king, but he was not king of kings. And so he abused his power in that he was going to do anything he wanted to, including desecrate something that was holy and set aside, set apart for use to honor God. And sometimes when we get the big head, we get a big punishment or a big consequence. And let's see what happened to the king. Daniel said, O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. Notice that he didn't say the most high king. He said the most high God. No fear. When you are going against somebody who has the big head, God gives you a boldness, a holy boldness, that you don't have that fear, because Daniel should have been afraid to say before the king, the most high God, especially since the king was just um, being disrespectful to the things that belong to God. He said, O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him, whom he would be, whom he would slew, and whom he would keep alive, and whom he set up, and whom he would put down. But when his heart was lifted and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingdom, from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Who? Now you are doing what your father had done. And so you're going to get what your father got. Verse 21 says, and he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beast, and his dwelling was with the wild asses, and they fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointed over it whomsoever he will. Now, I haven't told you what God is going to tell this king about his actions. God just reminded him of what happened to his father when his father had the big head. And so now God is going to tell him what's going to happen to him because he has the big head. So the moral of the story is that when God gives you a little power, gives you a little status, lifts you up, don't you lift yourself up, and don't you get the big head, because the same fall that happened to Nebuchadnezzar can be the same fall that happens to you. So when God puts you in a place of leadership, make sure you lead humbly and not lead with the big head. Because if you do, what happened to Nebuchadnezzar, like father, like son, can also happen to you. So I admonish you to walk in his word, and before you go out and run and do your biddings or do what you have to do. But I also want to tell you that this is some good stuff to look at. So I encourage you to go back and read Daniel and just take a look at what happened, not just to this king, but go back a couple of chapters and see what happened to his dad. And when his dad had that fall from grace, what did he choose to do? Because that will be a lesson for us. I'm sorry, I'm reading a comment. I'm gonna have to call a friend of mine. I was looking at her comment, and she was talking about dreams that we have, and a lot of times God is speaking to us in our dreams, and sometimes we need to um, sit back and think about the dreams that God gave us. And you also might want to ask one who has a good connection with God that interprets dreams to help you, find out what God is trying to tell you. But if you pray and ask Him and you wait on Him, He will tell you what He's trying to tell you. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you for your prayers. I feel better. And thanks to my little lightning who took my place yesterday. I'd like to tell her happy birthday today. And I want to send a shout out to Thunder for on his birthday sharing a word with us. I'll see you next time. Remember to walk before you run, and always remember that you are blessed to be a blessing. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.